Well, we come now to the next big story in the scriptures, which is the story of the great flood. You recall that St. Paul says the wages of sin is death. And we saw that not only had Adam and Eve committed sin, but also that wickedness continued after this, and they had two sons, Cain and Abel, and other children besides, as we saw. And one of them, Cain, turned and murdered his brother Abel out of envy, and it was a terrible crime. God had warned him. He thought about it and did it, even though God warned him. So again, we see that again, sin is now beginning to multiply. Now we pick up the story in Genesis 6 that sin had continued to increase in the human family. It says here in Genesis 6 and verse 3, "So the Lord God said, My spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal, and his days now shall be 120 years." Now, it looks like in the very opening period of Genesis after the fall, that they routinely lived to be close to 900 and some years of age. Noah lived into his 900s. Methuselah, I think the oldest, lived to be almost 960 some years old. A lot of people brush these things aside and say, well, that can't be so, and so on. Again, I think that at least accept this, that while some dismiss these ages of the patriarchs before the flood, the antediluvian, we call them patriarchs, I think what the scriptures are teaching us is very clear that with the increase of sin, lifespans shorten. And so the first shortening comes to about 120 years. Here we just read that in Genesis 6. By the time of King David, by the way, Moses lived to be about 120. But by the time of King David, he says in the Psalms, our years are 70 or 80 for those who are strong. So the lifespans continue to shrink because the wages of sin is death. God had said that if you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you will bring about suffering and death for yourself. And so it is. So first thing God does is he says, well, let me shorten the lifespans so that they don't continue to grow in pride. God has to put some limits on us. You see, our biggest sin is our pride. So pride, a colossal pride. We'll see in the next story after this one about the Tower of Babel. This is a constant battle about pride. We think we amount to something really, really great. And we're creatures, and we do have great excellences, but they come from God. And so, again, all of these things there's this constant battle, early on especially, with what we would call sins of pride. So having limited the lifespans for all who came after Noah, but God said, I also need to do something else. That sin had increased so much in the human family. So it says here, and again, I'm reading now from Genesis, also chapter 6. It says that then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was so great upon the earth, that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was altogether evil all the time. And so the Lord regretted that he had made man on earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man, whom I have created, from the face of the earth, every man and beast and crawling creature and bird of the air, for I am grieved that I have made them. Now, again, this idea of seeking God as grieved or regretting is sort of to project human emotions into God. It's called anthropomorphism. But I would say that it's a way of describing, though, that God is dealing with a real bugaboo of a problem, namely us. And our strong tendency to be stubborn and sinful. And so he's going to bring great flood waters. Now, although he says here originally that he's going to wipe all of man out, God doesn't have that fully in mind. But he intends to save a small remnant, namely 8 people in all, Noah and his family, and the animals, all right? So we now set up for the story of the great flood. Now, there's a lot of stories around the great flood that people kind of scratch their head and wonder about. First of all, is this a literal story about an actual ship or boat? And I would say take it at face value. Most ancient cultures have a very similar story. Some of the details are a little bit different, but they all have stories about a great flood. There seems to be some historical truth to there having at least been a great flood, and that a certain small group makes it through. Those so-called Gilgamesh epics, all these other ancient documents and things tell similar stories. Similar enough that some Bible scholars think that the Jewish people just got it from the Babylonians or other people. I don't think so. I think what you see is these different cultures who wrote different types of documents reflecting on a common event that took place in antiquity. Is every single detail exactly as it's reported? Well, I don't think we need to hold that, but why not? I mean, the early church always took these things kind of at face value. There are some details given to us about the ship, or shall we say the ark. It's not really a boat. A boat has a keel and a stern, different things. This is just a box that he's told to build, and it had certain very specific dimensions, and you can read all that in the flyer. And he was to build it out of gopher wood, and then he was to cover it with pitch so that it wouldn't leak. And at a certain point, God also said to him, "Now I want you to get 2 of every kind of animal that's unclean, and I want you to get 7 of animals that are clean. And I want you to bring these. I'm going to bring these pairs of animals, male and female, 7 pairs of clean animals, 2 pairs of unclean animals, and I want them to come to the ark." And now you think, well, gosh, first of all, how long did it take to build the ark? Well, we don't know. But given the dimensions and the fact that a small group, namely Noah's family, seems to have been building it, it could have taken hundreds of years. And remember, Noah lived to be 900 and some years. So you got to keep that in mind too. Having finally built it, well, however long it took, decades or so, it might have taken 100 years. It's finished. Now God says to the animals. You say, well, how did Noah run around and get all these animals? Well, he didn't. It says the story says that God brought them to the ark. They went on board, and when Noah and his family were instructed to go in, the Lord sealed them into the ark, which is, again, think of it more like a box. It's a large box. In fact, it's quite large. It's about the good length of a football field, and several football fields, and I give all those dimensions, in the ark. All right. Says here, it was approximately 450 feet long. So again, that's going to be a football field and a half in length, and it's going to be 75 feet wide and 45 feet high. Big, muy grande. And once they're sealed in the ark, the rains began, and the undersea or underground waters all erupted, and the whole earth, it says, was flooded. And we see that this took place, and for 40 days and 40 nights it rained, and then the waters prevailed on the earth, this flood, for 150 days. And finally, the waters begin to recede. And Noah comes forth, he releases the animals, and his family comes forth. It's a kind of a seed for a whole new creation. Now, why does God do this? Why so much destruction? Well, all I know is that we should not just sort of dismiss easily the fact that wickedness was very great and widespread upon the earth. Almost everything had become wicked in terms of what human beings were doing. So it was very serious. A few years ago, I had some beautiful roses out front, but they all became very diseased, and they had cross-pollinated, they'd grown wild. Really, none of them were able to be saved. So I just had the whole thing plowed under and put new roses in place. You can see them now outside of the rectory. So I would just simply say to you that sometimes we have to plow things under. And God chose to do this. Now, oh, that's wicked. Why would God do such a thing? Kill all those people? Well, remember, he's the one who gives life and the one who takes it. That's his job. So God's going to decide. He gave you life, he gave me life, and he'll decide how long we live, when we die, and how we die. Well, stop. That's his job. Okay? And likewise with the animals and so on. So, just like it's my job to tend those roses out there, well, that's what I had to do at that time. So, now we have new roses in place, and it's quite beautiful. All right. We have to take at face value that the wickedness was that great. And so God, to destroy this pride, shortened lifespans, cleared the decks, restarted it kind of with a remnant, a little seed. The animals, different pairs of animals, and likewise Noah and his family, and things begin anew. One of the baptismal rites says that the waters of the great flood, you made a sign of the end of sin and the new beginning of goodness. And so they prefigure baptism in that sense, right? Now, God does not simply wipe all things out again. Remember, he reestablishes things. And then he, in every way, he puts a rainbow in the sky. It says, after the flood and when Noah came forth, God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. So Noah, his wife, and his sons, 3 sons and their wives, all come forth and they begin anew, as do the animals. And God begins things anew. Now we'll see that still sin prevails, and we're going to see in the next story a little bit about the Tower of Babel. So God has to further humble our pride. And remember, the big enemy is pride. It's at the root of every other sin we commit. I will do what I want to do, and I will decide whether it's right or wrong. No one's going to tell me what to do. It's at the heart of every sin. It's our biggest enemy. And these early stories teach us, first of all, Cain and Abel, the ugliness of pride and envy. Second story, the flood. Pride, colossal pride and sin, and God has to humble and reduce the human race once again and begin anew. Then we'll see next week, Tower of Babel. He has to now scatter us about and humble our pride. We build this Tower of Pride of Babel. And we'll talk about that, of course, in the next video. I know these are fearsome stories, but we've tended to trivialize God today. We've tended to turn him into some nice guy who's supposed to do things the way we like it. And he's God, he's the Lord. He gives life and he takes life. He sets forth and he takes back. He sows and then he harvests and so on. These are the things that we have to respect of God. This is what God is, or what God does, and who he is. So I realize these challenge our modern thinking. But if you've got the scriptures teaching something that challenges our modern thinking, what do you think you need to choose? The ancient teaching of God or the modern thinking? I hope you got the answer. Challenge modern thinking. See, we've turned God into, we've sort of trivialized God. And we've got to stop that. God is the Lord. And when necessary, he takes dramatic action so that he can save some, even if sadly many are lost. Many, he says, are called, only few are chosen. And so God cares enough, at least for the few, that he's willing to say, well, I need to work with them and help them. And it's sad to say many prefer not what I'm offering. So we'll talk about these as the things unfold. Fearsome stories, yes. But important stories about where our pride leads, even more important. The problem isn't God. The problem is us. Amen.